Hello. I took this photograph in Washington in January. This is a glass wall. I know it looks like a building, but it's actually a glass wall. Because these 7 individuals here are all men. And inside this glass wall, there are hundreds of women cleaning the insides of these windows who are trying to get out and clean the outside, but they are being oppressed. They're inside scrap. You can see them there. Look, desperately trying to get out so they can get outside and clean and fly free like birds, like the men. And I've even worse news. Trump is building these things all over America. So you can see how bad things have got. So we need to defend our sisters and allow them to come outside the glass wall and clean the windows on the outside. So we can sit inside dangling other things. I love London, and I shouldn't, because I spent the worst days of my life here 20 years ago, more or less, when my daughter was about 4 years old, and I was dragged before your courts because I tried to protect her. And there I met the worst corruption. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I just want to mention it because it's my background. I was a journalist for 30 odd years, and I wrote about a lot of corruption, but I met nothing like this anywhere else. It was quite shocking. But eventually I got my daughter back to Ireland, and then things settled down. But one of the things I was aware of from the start was that I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know what it was. And being before family courts doesn't actually help you, because they don't test you as a father. They test you, but not as a father. They test you as a secondary mother. They test the things that you do that would be the same as what the mother does. Can you cook chickens? Change nappies? And this, by the way, is usually judges who have never changed a nappy in their lives. But I was here last year and I read a section from a book by an essay by Robert Bly. And I want to read it again, because this was the moment when I started to think about what was different about being a father. What did fathers actually do? Because it's something that isn't contained in our culture, really. It's not written down very much. It's not even an oral tradition. It's a behavioral tradition. Fathers do what their fathers did before them. But we don't know what it is. We don't describe it. We don't know anything about it, really. And these couple of paragraphs that I'm going to read now prompted me to write something else from my own experience, which I'm going to read after that. And this is from Robert Bly, from an essay he wrote for a book by Alexander Mitscherlich. It's the foreword. And this is what he said. He wrote this about 40 years ago. The father society has collapsed. It's not so much that the father doesn't talk or pay support or has left the house, but rather that the image of the working, teaching father has faded from the mind. An image that has existed brightly in the mind for thousands of years has faded. It is hard to imagine what that fading could mean. The disappearance of the working, teaching father has happened so abruptly, so unexpectedly from the century's viewpoint, and the implications are so immense that we really turn our heads away. We can't take it in. This is really true. This is what's going on in our society. It's not just they're trying to stop us being fathers. They're just trying to stop us because they don't know what a father is. I often used to say to young guys, who'd come to me looking for help, because I started to write about all this stuff in my column in the Irish Times, and young guys would come to me, and I'd say to them, they wouldn't understand what had happened to me. They were insulted by the judge. They were told, you have no rights in this court, and so on. Shut up, the judge would say, or suggest to them, shut up. And I would say to them, well, it's not surprising. The man in front of you, is usually a man, is 60 years of age plus. He has never changed a nappy in his life. He doesn't choke chickens. He doesn't know anything about being a father. And you're standing before him and you're saying that you have a responsibility to be a father, and that you want to be a father, that you want to be with your children. So he's looking at you and he says, well, either this guy's a freak or I'm a freak. And I'm the judge. So you're the freak. And that's the way it kind of works. Bly goes on. The father who has nothing to teach results in the first fatherlessness, and the unresponsive presidents and senators amount to seconds. The disappearance of the working and teaching father. Sorry, I read that already, didn't I? Sorry. He just repeats himself. The disappearance of the working and teaching father happened 40 or 50 years ago. No one willed it. Industrial circumstances took the father to a place where his sons and daughters could no longer watch him, minute by minute or hour by hour, as he fumbled incompetently with hoes, bolts, saws, shed doors, ploughs, wagons. His incompetence left holes or gaps where the sons and daughters could do better. That's what fathers do. They work with objects in full view of their children. Nobody ever told me that, but my father did it all my life. So I want to read a piece which brings together my father and my daughter in a funny kind of way. And this was really my response to Robert Bly's amazing idea, forgotten idea, that fathers were doing something all the time. Our fathers were doing something that we didn't recognize as fatherhood. This book is called Give Us Back the Bad Roads. It's a good title, I think. Elvis Costello once said about Morrissey, very unfairly but funnily, he said that Morrissey had written the best song titles ever written, but had never got round to the songs. Well, I think my titles are pretty good, but the books are here as well. So you judge how good they are. I remember one summer when I was 12 or 13, and this is, by the way, written to my father. It's a long letter. It's quite long. It's about how crazy Ireland has become in the last few years. I'll tell you how crazy it's become. I wrote for 25 years about fathers, and the stuff you've been listening today from Alex and William and all those other great people. And nothing happened, except it got worse. And politicians invited me out for coffees and asked me, and I told them, and they just did nothing. And then along came the LGBT goons demanding that the world be turned upside down on their behalf, and the politicians said, sure. So now you have a situation where in Ireland, I don't know how it is here at the moment. I've lost track a little bit, although I've been hearing some of the Williams thing earlier on. It's pretty scary. But in Ireland, if you're the lesbian partner of a woman who's left her husband, the father of her children, her lesbian partner is entitled to go to court and get rights, parenting rights, which the father will lose. And if you're a single father, forget it. The lesbian partner will have all the rights and you will have zero. That's the law in Ireland now. So for that reason and others, I left journalism in Ireland on the 22nd of May 2015, which was the day after the count in the gay marriage referendum. And I won't be writing back. I won't be going back. Because journalism is an obscene, corrupt profession. Not alone in Ireland, but everywhere. So, I remember one summer when I was 12 or 13, and you put me to grinding the valves in an engine you had acquired to replace the one in BZC 648, which was on its very last legs. The new engine came out of a Thames you'd found somewhere up the country. I don't remember the full reg number of the donor vehicle, but the prefix was ELI. The Thames had been clumsily hand-painted in canary yellow, and was held together by the moss around the windows. But you were certain that the engine was basically sound. You asked me if I would grind the valves, and thinking it an easy job, I rashly agreed. You set me up in one of the sheds and explained the general principle at the back of the endeavour. I gathered that the objective was to restore the cylinder head to something like its original condition. You showed me the valves and their seatings and explained their function and how some worked in conjunction with the camshaft to regulate the flow of the mixture into the cylinders and others to let the spent gases escape. You explained why it was vital that the carbon deposits be cleaned away and the matching subtle ridges in the valve heads and seatings be restored to their original pristine condition. You showed me how to do it, using a rubber suction cup at the end of a short stick to twist the valve rapidly and repeatedly in its seating, using a rough paste for lubrication. You said it would take a few days, at maybe a couple of hours a day. Yeah, right, as my daughter Roisin might say. It seemed to go on the entire summer with no appreciable progress until the very end. I would dutifully put in my couple of hours most days, and you would return at evening time and immediately lapse into inspection mode. You had this way of weighing everything up very methodically, looking at things from all angles. I still sometimes imitate the way you would push your glasses up on your forehead and peer closely at things. You would do it as you walked along the street, catching sight of a recent piece of work, a new shop window or a plastered wall. You would go over, shove up your glasses and begin rubbing your fingers along the woodwork or plaster, sometimes getting down on your knees to eye up the line of it. It drove me mad, but now sometimes I have the urge to do it myself. You would peer at the valves one by one for a long time, fingering them lightly. Sometimes you would take the stick with the rubber suction cup and give it a go yourself for a minute or two, carefully noting the outcomes. Then you would straighten up, contemplate for a half minute, and pronounce, more grinding. This went on for weeks and then months, with occasional breaks when you were feeling unwell and I was required to come along on the run to help with the mail bags and the newspapers and the day-old chicks and the 80-year-old passengers. This was a welcome relief from the grinding, and yet I remember going back to the task afterwards with a new zeal. The progress on any given day was so infinitesimal as to be undetectable, yet gradually I began to observe a change in the surfaces I was addressing. I began to notice that the rim of the valve had a pattern of grooves, not unlike a gramophone record, which corresponded to a similar pattern in the grooves on the head. As the grinding took effect, the result was gradually to clean away the carbon that had formed on both surfaces, which first broke down into spots and then revealed tiny pits, which gradually faded away under the attrition of the grinding stick. But even towards the end, as I was beginning to note the fruits of my exertions, you were relentless. Every evening you would return, show up your glasses, peer expectantly at the valves and their seatings and pronounce, more grinding. Encouragingly, you became a little more selective as time went on, picking out particular valves for special attention and pronouncing one or other, almost done. Then, one magical evening, you stood up and said nothing for a minute or more, as though engaged in some profound calculation. You wiped your hands on a greasy cloth and declared, I'd nearly say they're fit. That Sunday, we reassembled the engine, restoring the block with its new gaskets and the other reconditioned parts you had prepared. I remember watching as you wired in the battery and connected the jump leads. The engine burst into life with a thunder of protest and a ferocious belching of smoke. It spluttered for a few moments, then found a rhythm and calmed down to a purr. We stood there listening to it without speaking, each paying attention for any telltale irregularity. There was none. You nodded. It might not be so bad, you said. I don't think you ever praised me so highly. To be standing there together in the balm of that noise, knowing that what it signified and what had arisen from it, what it had arisen from, we were united in a way that could never be erased. At the time, I did the grinding for you to gain your favour and your affection. You had a way of equating work with goodness and idleness with the opposite. So we always felt wicked unless we were doing something useful. To be honest, I thought you were just giving me an awkward job to keep me off the streets. Now I see more clearly you were doing what Robert Bly said fathers had always done. When I look back on that summer today, it becomes the most glorious of them all. That was the summer I learned about resolve, application, determination, perseverance, postponed gratification, cause and effect, effort and reward, about how the impossible is not impossible. I learned a little about engines as well, but this was a minor collateral benefit. That engine lasted for years afterwards, and every time I heard it running, I was taken back to those moments together, conscious of my part in it, and your part in teaching me things that will always be intimately connected to the sound of internal combustion engines. One of the things I unconsciously adopted from your personality was the idea of reconstructing myself to cohere with some unfocused moral paradigm for the benefit of my growing daughter. It's strange to think how easily I fell into this without thinking about it, becoming pious and solemn and serious-minded without knowing what purpose this might serve. I remember the first day I said fuck in front of Roisin. It was an accident because by whatever mechanism I had never come close to doing it before. When I say it was an accident, I don't mean me saying fuck, but the fact of her hearing it. I said fuck all the time to other people, still do. But up to that point I had never used such language in front of her, which is probably related to the fact that I never used it in front of you either, not as long as you lived. My friends all said fuck in front of their fathers without as much as a pardon my French. Indeed, with a kind of gleeful bravado that seemed enhanced because they knew I was listening and that I would never say fuck in front of you. I'm not proud of saying fuck all the time, and neither am I boasting about not saying it in front of Roisin, which at the time seemed to me the least I could do for her, although I couldn't for the life of me explain why I thought this. In fact, I recognised two conflicting absurdities in my use of the word fuck, which I find myself unable to decide between in terms of their burdens of silliness. On the one hand, I possess this fairly common sense of puzzlement that a word, any word, can become so powerful as to be unutterable in any context, even a four-letter word beginning with F. I think about flip or fake or fact. I wonder if they could ever become so robust and fierce as to deliver shockwaves simply by virtue of being spoken. But on the other hand, I think it is right that most of the time, for most of my life, I managed to refrain from saying fuck in front of you. Mammy, nuns, priests and teachers. I once said fuck in front of a priest, just to see how he would react, but he didn't react at all, which opened up all sorts of new and relativistic speculations in me. That was some time after I was caught by my daughter accidentally saying fuck while she was within earshot, and probably triggered by that event, perhaps distantly related to the way they say it's easier to kill the second time. As far as I know, you never said fuck in all your 84 years and 9 months of living in this dimension, even in the deepest recesses of yourself. I could be wrong about this. It's one of those questions I wish I had taken up with your old friend, the gentleman, when I had the chance, but it never occurred to me, and now your secret, if any, is safe. In fact, if you had told me that even once or twice he heard you saying fuck, I think I would have become convinced that everything he told me was lies. I cannot imagine you saying fuck, and if you ever did, I don't want to know about it. And this was certainly a factor in my never saying fuck in front of Roisin, until one day I did. She was 7 years old at the time, old enough as it turned out, to understand that fuck was too robust and incendiary a word to be said by fathers in front of their children, yet young enough to be shocked by hearing it, which implies some understanding of the significance, if not the meaning of the word, or at least of its cultural power. I was on the phone talking to someone who was obviously neither my mother nor a priest. Roisin had been in another room, but then she returned quietly and unexpectedly in the middle of my telephone conversation. I looked up from just saying fuck, and suddenly there she was, looking at me with her saucer eyes out on stilts. I recognised immediately the significance of what was occurring. I terminated the telephone conversation as quickly as I could and waited for her to say something. Eventually, she said, "Daddy said a bad word." Half innocently and half ironically. It struck me instantly that she obviously knew the word and also knew that it was bad. I wondered if this was because she had heard other people saying it all the time, because she had never heard me saying it, put two and two together, words that other people say, but Daddy must be bad words. I don't remember knowing the word fuck when I was 7. I certainly don't think if I'd heard it then, even from you, I would have recognised it as a word to be shocked by. One of my favourite authors is the British rock and roll writer Paul Morley, who started out in the 1970s with the New Musical Express and has since written a couple of the best non-fiction books of the third millennium. One of these is called Nothing, an exquisite memoir about the suicide of his father. Morley in that book described the one and only time in his childhood he heard his father say fuck and the effect this had on him. He remembered that at the time he had been old enough not to know the word, but also to note that the way his father said it, he must have said it all the time. His father too had been on the telephone speaking to someone to whom he said fuck as a matter of course. Morley remarked too on noting how skillfully his father had hitherto refrained from saying fuck in front of his children. As he said it, Morley wrote, he sounded freer, looser, not as still and caged as he seemed to be to me. He sounded like somebody else, maybe like somebody I might have got to know if he was still alive. It slightly scared him and slightly thrilled him to hear his father say fuck. It showed him in 4 letters how much his father had hidden from him about himself, about how his father had isolated different parts of himself and kept them always separate. He didn't give the whole of himself to anyone, not even himself, until he died, when he brought all the parts of himself together. I won't go on, it's a kind of a longer section. This is kind of by way of a contribution to to whatever culture we might generate of fatherhood, because we need to do more than win battles. We need to actually talk to each other about how we do these things, because it's not an easy job in a culture which is so hostile. Not an easy job in any kind of culture, actually. But before I finish, just finishing, I have 2 pieces of good news. One is personal. It's that my daughter, Roisin, is now living in a house I built in Sligo, which is only a couple of miles from her grandfather was born. She never met him, but she's living, she walks in his footsteps every day. And that's no thanks to the official solicitor of the United Kingdom of England and Wales, because they are the most corrupt people I have ever encountered in my life. But she's there now, and she is growing vegetables and baking cakes in the west of Ireland, in Yeats' country. Alex quoted from Yeats, beautiful poet. The second piece of good news is this. 20 odd years ago, when this started happening to me, I couldn't believe it. You know, I often say that I've been a lefty at the time. Felt, well, you know, now that I've found this terrible injustice, I know what to do, because all my lefty friends who deal with injustice all the time, right? And they will, you know, be horrified when I tell them what I've discovered about the way fathers are treated in this so-called civilized society. So I rushed back to my compadres. Come quickly, come quickly. You'll never guess what I've discovered here. And they came running and they started kicking my head in, and they've been kicking it in ever since. And they were the same people who were on the front line of the gay marriage debate in Ireland, every one of them, to a man and a woman. So I started writing about feminism and all that stuff. And I didn't realise then that I was over the target. Alex mentioned Douglas Murray's amazing new book. Please buy it. It's got it all. I didn't know that I was onto this in a crude way. I was floundering to try and find words to describe what I was encountering in the Irish Times, and I did that. But feminism started this. Here's the good news. Feminism started this, and you've heard a lot about this all day. It's all true, and worse. But the amazing thing has happened now. Out of the feminism has grown the LGBT and the trans. And now guess what's happened? The trans are turning on the feminists. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that fucking beautiful? And you know, there are people that are saying, oh, this is terrible. Oh, we must support our sisters. Yeah, right. I'll tell you what. My dream. I have a dream, my friends. And my dream is of the Olympics. And you know that days, what do you call it, days, or a little platform with a 1, 2, 3? My ambition, my dream, my friends, is one day to watch as 3 hairy-arsed men stand on the women's swimming championship days and take all the prizes. And I'd say, that's so sad. That's too bad. Like Mr. Trump. So sad. Thank you very much.